Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching creating backup solutions before stuff blows up. Because if you create backup solutions after stuff blows up, well, I think enough said about that, right? So we're going to be talking about how to use Windows Server Backup, WB Admin, and NTDS Util to create backup media. In this video, we're going to start off with an hour of prevention prevents an ounce of pink slip, because that's really all it takes to get you fired, isn't it? Here, we're going to talk about your 3 built-in backup tools that are available in Server 2008. And of course, we're going to talk about what kind of backup strategy, at least initially, we're going to be using with Globomantics. So enough, let's go ahead and let's jump right in here. This video really is all about saving your job. I mean, everything in Globomantics is up and running really smoothly. And so now it's time to seriously start thinking about creating backup solutions before everything blows up, because it is an eventuality. Like I mentioned to you earlier, in 10 years of doing computer work, there's one true thing that I have found, and that is that computers break. And so you need to be ready for that eventuality. Now, here's the thing. With Server 2008, the tools are okay, but there are much more powerful and full-featured tools out there available from third parties. And Microsoft knows that, you know that, eventually Hank will know that, because you'll be able to talk him into it. But for right now, you'll have to make do with what you have, and there are some pretty decent tools already built into Server 2008 just for this. So those main 3 tools that we're going to be talking about in this video, we're going to be first off starting with Windows Server Backup. Now this is a graphical user interface that creates some simple backups, and if you're familiar with older tools like NT Backup, Server Backup actually replaces that older set of tools. The next tool that we're going to be looking at is called WB Admin. And can you imagine what that might stand for? Yeah, that's Windows Backup Administration. This tool is actually a command line tool, and we can use this for creating scheduling backups. It's a little more powerful than Windows Server Backup. We'll talk about that. But it's also available in what we call Server Core. Now, we really haven't talked about Server Core much as of yet. We'll get to it later on in this series when we do a server for a Dallas office. But for right now, I just want you to know that WB Admin is available for Server Core, which makes it cool. And then last but not least, there's an extremely powerful tool called NTDS Util, and that stands for Network Directory Services Utility. Duh statement. Thank you, Coach. Blinding flash of the obvious. Moving on. Now, it can do some advanced backup operations. We're going to use it more in the restoration video, which we'll do later on in this course. But NTDS Util really is kind of this little Swiss Army knife and has all kinds of really cool stuff. But it's specifically for Active Directory files and the database that contains all of your Active Directory objects. So those are our 3 tools. Let's look at each one of them in detail, and then we're going to come up with at least a backup strategy that, while it's maybe not the best of the universe, it will at least get the job done for the time being. Now, let's first start off by talking about the easiest one, Windows Server Backup. Now, this one is not hard to use. I mean, there are some tools in here as soon as you actually get it installed, because, by the way, it is a feature that you have to install. It doesn't install automatically. It's pretty easy to do. Over in the Actions pane, you have the buttons that you click on to do whichever task you need to. You can set up a schedule. You can back it up only once. And, of course, the recovery item as well. But, again, you have to install it before using it, okay? It does not install automatically. It's not part of the default installation. Now, it's fairly limited. If you're used to using the old tools, the NT Backup tools, just so you know, there's actually some fairly decent limitations on these. Now, first of all, it backs up only to a shared folder or a network-attached storage box or to DVD. It does not back up to tape. Okay, it's a very important distinction to make. Now, can you still back up to tape? Well, what you can do is you can use this tool to create backup and then use third-party software to back up the backup to tape. And wow, was that just really redundant. Now, it does not back up singular files or folders. It only backs up entire volumes. Okay, so it only backs up entire hard disks or partitions. And if you do a backup scheduled, there's some advanced items that we really don't have time, is kind of out of the scope to talk about inside of this course. But if you keep backing up to the same folder, it will actually overwrite your old backup. All right, so something you need to think about and probably investigate later on. but it's a good solution for very simple backups. And if you're a small organization where there's not a huge amount of stuff going on your server anyway, it's a good deal. So that's our first one. It's very easy. It's very graphical. It's a couple of buttons. I mean, there's not much to actually utilizing it, but you do need to kind of keep this in mind that if you use the same shared folder over and over, it's going to overwrite your old stuff, which is why the DVD option is oftentimes, I think, going to be utilized with this particular feature of Server 2008, because you don't want to overwrite the same backup set over and over and over again, because you're going to lose too much data that way. All right, now let's talk about the next tool, WB Admin. Now this has some stronger features and it does have some more options, but it is on the command line. So you're going to have to pick up a couple of command line tool skills in this mix. Now it can still run a one-time backup and it can schedule regular backups too. Okay? So in that fashion, it does have similar features to the Windows Server backup utility, but it can also back up what we call the system state. Now, the system state basically just contains all of the guts of your domain controller. Things like the registry, the boot file, system files, the Active Directory Services database. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Your sysvol directory, another big one. So basically, it grabs all the guts of your domain controller and backs them up for a faster return to service for a particular machine. Now, the system state data that it generates can be restored using WB Admin, which is probably what you're going to do most of the time, but it can also be restored using the graphical Windows Server backup tools that we just talked about as well. So if you want a little more power, or all of you want is the system state data, because you don't want to back up your entire C drive or the entire volume, then this might really be the way to go. A system state data backup is going to be much smaller in terms of disk size because you're only getting the guts. You're not getting every single file on a particular volume like you do with a regular backup, because, by the way, that's what you end up getting with WB Admin. You get the whole regular backing up the entire volume unless you specify system state. And by the way, you see that right here, start system state backup in the little screen capture over here. But you can also do a regular start backup, and I'll show you how to do that once we actually get into the backup procedure that we're going to run on the servers for Globomatic. All right, so let's talk about the third option. Now here it's kind of got a funny name. It's not as funny as WB Admin, but NTDS Util takes a little bit longer to say. This thing is specifically for managing and doing maintenance on Active Directory. It's not so much for backing up your whole server, so I don't want you to think about it in that fashion. But what NTDS Util can do is it can create a backup media type called IFM, or also known as Install from Media. Now, once you create this Install from Media package, it can actually make your creation or recreation, as the case may be, of a domain controller a whole lot faster than trying to build it up from scratch. Not to mention, if you're trying to build or add a domain controller to a particular domain, and you don't want your domain controllers eating up all of your bandwidth during the day with that whole replication thing, when 2 domain controllers or 3 domain controllers or however many there are or may happen to be get together and they start talking back and forth and sharing information and storing information and all that stuff. When you build or add a new domain controller, you can use this IFM media that we create using NTDS Util and bring up that domain controller to functional status a whole lot faster, and you get to save on bandwidth. But it can also be used as a type of backup. Now, NTDS Util is actually an interactive tool, and depending upon what context that it's in, for example, if you're in the IFM context, you're going to have a different set of commands than if you are in the files context. So there's a lot of interactivity. It's kind of a cool and kind of a fun tool to use if you ask me. But when you use NTDS Util in conjunction with your backup media that you create with WB Admin or the Windows Server backup, it can actually allow you to take Active Directory objects that have been deleted, like organizational units, user accounts, computer accounts, whatever they may be. You can actually restore individual items back to your Active Directory, but you can't do that if you don't have backup media that has been created from WB Admin or Windows Server Backup. So ntdsutil plus wbadmin or Windows Server Backup, as the case may be, is a very powerful combination when you start thinking about, and once you start to see what it can do, you're really going to like it. Now, we're not really going to talk about restoration in this video. All we're doing right now is we're creating the media that we're going to use when and if, and by the way, in this video series, there will be a when, all of your machines blow up. And then I'll show you how to use the media we create in this video to restore the rest of your network, or at least the rest of your Active Directory and domain controllers, back to functioning status. Now, ntdsutil also has another tool. We're going to talk about this in another video too, but I just want to take a minute here to mention it. It can take snapshots of your Active Directory database so you can track and see what your Active Directory looks like over time. This is a brand new feature. It's very, very cool. We'll talk about this in another video though, as to what you might be able to do with that. In terms of this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using ntdsutil, what a funny name, to create IFM media, which we're then going to turn around and use in another video in this very series. But IFM media can be a valuable kind of backup as well. Now, while we're waiting on a third-party solution, we need to figure out something to do with our current Server 2008 situation so that in case something does blow up, we're ready for it. So here's the plan, okay? First of all, you're going to use Windows Server Backup. You're going to schedule nightly backups to the second disk on NYDC2K8, okay? Here's the thing I want you to know about Windows Server Backup. If you're going to do scheduled backups, you have to do them to an attached hard disk, okay? You cannot just drop in a DVD and schedule a backup and then let it go. It won't work that way, okay? If you want to back up to DVD, you have to do a one-time recovery. And by the way, I'm going to show you how to do that here coming up in the demonstration. So we're going to be setting up our Windows Server Backup for nightly backups to the second disk, the second hard disk on NYDC2. Then we're going to create a system state backup on a weekly basis for emergency restoration. Now, a system state backup, remember, only saves out the guts of your Active Directory, so it's going to be a little bit smaller than your standard Windows Server Backup files are going to be. Then last but not least, we're going to create an IFM backup as an additional emergency solution and also for easy addition of future domain controllers as well. IFM backups we can use to create new domain controllers, or we can use it to recreate domain controllers in case they blow up. Okay? And by the way, IFM is actually the smallest media size. So just as a quick reminder, and something that I'm going to probably say several times during this video, is that this is going to be the largest. Okay? System state backup is kind of the medium-sized backup, and your system state is going to be the smallest backup. And each one of these backups have a different purpose. A Windows Server full backup gets you your entire server back. System state backup only gets you the absolute bare minimum that you need to get a domain controller back up. And then an IFM backup only gets you the Active Directory database and the sysvol folder. So really the bare minimum of what you would need to create or rebuild a domain controller. All right, so now we know what we're going to be doing in our demonstration section. So let's go do it, right? Let's go ahead and let's bounce on over to CL1 and let's use remote desktop to access DC2. Remember, we're going to be doing all this work on DC2. Due to the fact that I have actually been backing up DC1 already, okay, just a little bit of confession here. I want to let you know that, because this network is, it's a regular network, so I've actually been doing backups of DC1 all the way throughout this course as I'm producing it. So that way, in case something does blow up, I can get it back too. So even though this is a test network, I still have to do my standard system administrator duties to make sure that I can use this test network all the way throughout this course and I don't have to rebuild it 6 or 7 times. Okay, so come on, let's go. All right, so here we are over on the Client 1 machine that we've been using all this time, and we're going to start off by taking just a quick look at what a backup actually looks like. Okay, I want to show you, I actually have a backup here on NYMem1 that I want to just take a quick look at. It's over here hanging out on the ops drive, here in this B shared folder. Notice that it's called Windows Image Backup. Well, isn't that interesting? Let's open this guy up. Here's the backup files for NYDC1. Now, I created this backup using Windows Server Backup, the one that we're about to utilize in just a few moments here. But here's a folder that contains the backup. Let's open this guy up. And here's a whole bunch of XML documents, and here's a virtual hard disk file. Notice that my server doesn't have a huge amount of data on it right now. It's only about 10 gigabytes. But at the end of the day, here's just kind of a little behind the scenes shot at this, is that Windows Server Backup actually uses and creates virtual hard disk files for its backup. I think that's kind of an interesting little side note, an interesting little tidbit there. All right, so let's close that and let's go back to our Client 1 machine here, and we're going to start off by doing our Windows Server Backup on NYDC2. Now remember that the first thing that we have to do is we have to actually install our Windows Server Backup utility from the features. So when I go here into storage, which by the way, that's where you'll normally find it in the Server Manager. Here is the Windows Server Backup item. Even though it's available here, if it's not installed, it's going to tell you that Windows Backup is not installed on this computer. Okay, so we have to actually get it installed. It'll actually tell you where to go to. Go to Start, Server Manager, Add Features, and then you select Windows Server Backup. So let's go here to the Features section, and let's go ahead and get this guy installed real quick. It's not a very long install. We'll just simply click on Add Features here. And now we'll go ahead and we'll scroll down the list and we'll find Windows Server Backup, and we'll put a check mark in that box. Now I'm going to expand this here real quick. Notice that there are two options underneath, and when I select the checkbox at the top level, it only selects Windows Server Backup, which then installs the Microsoft Management Console so we can get to it from Server Manager. And it also installs the WB-admin command line tool. So I want you to keep that in mind too, that the WB-admin command line tool is not going to be available until you actually install this particular feature. Now the command line tools basically give you Windows PowerShell scripting ability. That's way far outside of what we want to deal with in this course. So let's go ahead and we'll just tell it next. We'll just leave that one singular item selected and tell it to install. And it's going to sit here and install the package here real quick. It's not going to take very long, but I'm still going to pause the video, wait till it's finished up, and then come back as soon as it's finished. Alright, so that actually only took about 2 minutes there to finish installation, so I'm going to go ahead and close this guy up. And now, back here in the Server Manager, we'll go to, let's go to Windows Server Backup, not Disk Management. There we go. Now it looks like we are not getting the MMC in here, so let's go ahead and let's close our Server Manager and let's open him back up. And that should give it the refresh that it needs in order to load up the Server Backup Microsoft Management Console so we can actually get access to this particular feature. And there we go. Let's go into the storage section and Windows Server Backup. And there we go. So it's going to take just a few seconds here for it to load all the way up. Alright, so there we go. So Windows Server Backup has now been installed so we can actually use it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up that second disk here on NYDC1 so it's actually usable, because, well, if we go in here to Disk Management, you see here that we have our two partitions we set up earlier, but you'll notice that our second disk on this machine has not yet been initialized. So let's go ahead and let's do that here real quick. Let's right click on disk 1 and select online, and that's going to initialize or at least bring up the disk. We'll right click and select initialize, and we will use the MBR master boot record partition style again, and we'll tell it OK. So let's go to bring that disk online. So again, 2 right clicks, 1 to bring it online and 1 to initialize the disk. Now we need to do something with our unallocated space. I'm going to right click here on it. I'm just going to select New Simple Volume and tell it next. I'm just going to go ahead and take the entire disk itself and use it for my backups, at least for the time being. Remember, this is a very simple backup process until we get some software that's more full-featured. So we're going to go ahead and we'll assign it drive F. That'll be fine, and we'll tell it next. We're going to do a quick NTFS format here, and we're going to label this guy backups, and we'll do a quick format, and we'll tell it next. And finish. Now it's going to sit here and spin for just a little while it does a really super fast partition here. And now we're ready to go. All right, so let's go back now to our Windows Server backup. Let's go ahead and let's schedule our backups here. And again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up a nightly backup. We'll run it around midnight or so. And then the next morning, we'll burn it to a DVD real quick and then remove it off of the disk. Not the most efficient backup solution, but again, it's a very simplistic backup, and we'll get the job done just in case something does blow up in the meantime while we're waiting for our other software. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do a full backup of the server initially, but something that we might want to take into account, let's go into custom here, and let's see if there's some additional volumes that are being included in this. Yeah, see, right now it's going to try to back up all 3 of our disks, and that's not so much what we want to do. We don't want to back up the data disk because, well, right now there's nothing on it, and we don't want to back up the backups. So let's we're going to go ahead and we'll take those out here. And if you'll see here, volumes that contain an operating system component cannot be excluded. Well, these 2 do not contain operating system components, so we're going to be A-OK. We'll tell it next. And now we're going to specify the backup time when it's actually going to run. And again, we're going to have it run at midnight. Now, obviously, we could run it more than once a day. We can schedule at very specific times. But once a day for right now should do the trick. We'll tell it next. And now we need to tell it where to store the backups. So let's click on Show All Available Disks. And so here it's showing us the virtual disk that we have added to our machine. This is that 120 gigabyte drive that we just set up and we just specified. So we'll go ahead and we'll put a check mark in that particular disk and we'll tell it OK. All right, so we're good to go for this one. We're going to check mark that disk one more time here and we're going to tell it next. All right, now it's going to tell me right here that when I finish this wizard, the selected disk will be reformatted and all the existing volumes and data on the disk will be deleted. Well, okay, that's fine. There's nothing on it anyway right now, so no worries there. So we'll just go ahead and we'll tell this guy yes, reconfirm that the appropriate disk is being selected, and we'll tell it next. We're about to create the following backup schedule, yada yada, that's fine. We're going to back up local disk C. We're putting it on that secondary 120 gigabyte drive. We're going to run it at midnight every night. Now we'll tell it to finish. It's going to reformat that disk, even though we just formatted again, and that's okay. Won't hurt anything to let it do its thing for that. All right, so now the backup schedule has been created. It'll tell you when the first backup is actually going to happen, and it's going to tell you, hey, make sure that the disks you're using are attached to this computer and available. Okay, we'll tell it to close, and we will let that guy do its thing at midnight. Now, let's go ahead, let's do a quick backup just in case, though. So I'm going to show you how to do the backup once wizard here, too. And it's just as fast, just so you know. And the options are going to be fairly similar. We're going to create a backup now. We can either use the same options that we set up in the backup wizard, or we can use different options. Let's go ahead and try different options here real quick. We'll tell it next. What type of configuration do we want to do? Let's do a custom, and we want to exclude some volumes from this backup because remember, it might try to include that data disk as well as the backup, and we don't need to back up the backups. Now, when you're doing a one-time backup, make sure that you put a check mark here. Enable system recovery. I'm not sure why you wouldn't, but other than to save space. But most of the time, you're going to want to do this, especially for your domain controllers, right? So we're going to go ahead and leave that guy check mark to ensure that all of the critical data that is necessary to bring a domain controller back is there in the backup image as well. So we'll tell it next. And now it's going to ask us what type of storage, where is this going to be? Now we could put it on the local drives, but with this option, we can also specify a remote shared folder as well. So that's kind of neat, and that's actually what I've been doing with DC1. You remember how I was telling you that I've actually been backing up DC1 for a little bit now, just as good maintenance on my part, because even though this is a test network, I still am responsible for bringing this network back in case it blows up. So I can go ahead and leave local drives and tell to select, and now you'll see here that I can actually back up to my DVD drive, okay? Or I could also back up to the data drive. I want to kind of give you a quick note here, though. You can only recover full volumes from a DVD backup, okay? If you do a full volume backup, it'll help you recover from a disk failure, but you can't really get back individual files or folders from backup DVDs. So I think what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and we'll put it on the data drive for the time being, especially since we already have a backup scheduled for midnight tonight that will back up to our F drive that we just set up. And so since this is just a one-time quick backup, we'll go ahead and we'll drop it over here to the data drive E, and we'll tell it next. All right, now what type of volume shadow copy service backup do you want to create? Now, the initial VSS copy backup this is what is recommended. Choose this option if you are using another backup product to backup applications that are on the volumes included in the current backup. This option retains the application log files. All right, so we're going to use this if we're already using an additional software solution. Now, we aren't, right? At least at this stage in the game. So we might want to stop and think about this full backup option, or we can choose this option if you're not using any other backup product to back up your applications. This option updates each file's backup history and clears the application log files. All right, so let's go ahead and let's use the full backup here. We'll tell it next, and we'll click on backup. And now it's going to sit here and start running like mad while it creates the backup. And this is going to take quite a while. And quite a while, I mean probably 20 minutes to a half an hour. So I'm actually going to pause the recording right now while this thing is throwing that little blue bar across the screen over and over and over again. And then I'll be right back as soon as it wraps it up. All right, so the backup is now complete, as you see. It didn't take that long. It only took about 20 minutes or so. So let's go ahead and let's close this out. Let's go over and let's bounce on over to the hard disk. Oh, here's the computer right here. Let's go ahead and open up the E drive. And let's take just a quick look here at the Windows image backup folder for NYDC2 2K8. Just make sure that everything looks copacetic. Yep, here's our VHD file. Here's a whole bunch of XML files. Everything is looking A-OK. What we should do with this at this stage in the game is take this guy and burn him to a DVD, or he can just stay there. I mean, you know, we do have that secondary backup running at midnight tonight, and this could be just an initial, emergency backup file. Either way, we do want to make sure that we do end up with our backups on DVD somewhere, somehow, just so that we do have a hard copy that is separate and off of the hard disk in case of hard disk failure, right? I mean, it's pretty tough to squirrel up a DVD if we're semi-careful with it. And chances are what we're going to do with that DVD is we're going to mail it off to a courier or however we might handle doing backups to a secure storage facility. Now, we really should do a whole video series on just doing backups because it's a lot bigger deal, in terms of considerations for how you store them, how you get them there, the security, and all that good stuff. But I think in terms of getting our heads wrapped around what Windows Server Backup can do, this is, I think, good enough for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of the E drive here. You'll notice here that every time a backup happens, there's going to be a little log that occurs here in the server managers, just to let you know that it actually did occur, when it happened, and such. If you double click on it, it'll give you just a quick message about what kind of backup it was and all of the pertinent data. All right, so we have set up our scheduled backup, and I did go ahead and show you how to do the backup once. Remember, in order to do DVD backups, you have to do the backup once, all right? You cannot schedule a DVD backup. You have to have an attached disk to the machine. Now, that disk might be a USB drive, or it might be some other newfangled contraption where we actually have removable disks. But regardless, if you're going to do backups to DVD, we have to do the backup once. We can't do the backup schedule. That's going to have to be backed up to a attached hard disk and then burned to a DVD afterwards, after the backup has been completed, if that's the way that you want to go. Now, obviously, could you back up the backup drive that we created that's going to hold those backups to tape? Well, sure, I suppose you could. Again, you're going to have a third-party software for that. But since what we're doing right now, keep in mind, is a simple backup strategy that will basically hold us over until we get a better software package and maybe even better equipment to do the backups, it'll be good enough. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go into the command line and we are going to go do that WB admin stuff. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's open up a command prompt here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create the system state backup next. So real quick, I'm just going to do a WB admin \?. Now what that's going to do is that's going to provide me with all of the commands that are available within WB admin. So now what we want to do is we want to do a start system state backup. That's what we want to happen here. So let's do this. Let's do WB admin start system state backup space \?. Now what we're doing when we do the \?? switch is we're providing the syntax for that particular, or we're learning the syntax for that particular command. So here's just a quick example of what it might look like. WB admin start system state backup. Then we need to put in -backup target and then whatever file or whatever place that we want it to go live at. So I'm going to hit the up arrow key and I'm going to put in -backup target colon, and then we're going, let's dump this to the E drive too, okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll put it in the E drive and we'll just hit the enter key. Now remember, the E drive is that little 40 gigabyte partition. The system state backup is going to be much smaller in terms of its file size. We're not backing up an entire volume. We're only getting the guts of the Active Directory stuff. All right, so it's telling us this would back up the system state from volume local disk C to E. Do you want to start the backup? Yes, I do. We'll tell it yes, and away it goes. So you see that it's a very simple command, WB admin start system state backup -backup target, and we put in the drive or the folder path that we want that system state to go live in. And so I'm going to pause the video right now while it finishes its creating the backup. It might take a few minutes, and as soon as it gets done, I'll be right back and I'll show you the results. So we're back, and you see that our backup has completed. It took a little bit longer than what I was expecting, about 30 minutes, but there's a lot of stuff, a lot of files in the guts of the Active Directory that did need to get backed up. And let's see here, about 62,000. So, but it did complete successfully, and it did keep a log of that particular backup right here in the Windows logs, Windows Server backup, system state backup, in the log. Okay, now let me go show you where this is at and what this looks like, okay? I'm going to go to the computer and to the E drive where we saved this guy at. And inside of Windows Image Backup, that same folder that we saved our stuff to previously, here is the system state file folder. So here are the guts, the absolute basics of what you absolutely need for a system state backup, okay? So let's open this guy up and open up the backup folder here for it. Again, we have a VHD file, slightly smaller than what it would be for the normal data backup. But this is the guts, okay? This is the absolute necessity of what you might need in order to recover your Active Directory database. Earlier, we should probably really say your domain controller back to that particular system state. So while you don't get all of the data files, you at least get your domain controller stuff back to where you need it to be, okay? All right, so we have created two kinds of media so far. We have created backups and full back. One is a full backup from our, actually we created what, 2 full backups? Yeah, 2 full backups, right? Although one has yet to complete because it's scheduled to run at midnight tonight. We did a one-time backup using Windows Server Backup, and now we've used wb-admin to create that system state. So now let's go ahead and close out of this. Now what we need to do next is we need to create the install from media, the IFM media, right? It's kind of redundant. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to be back here in the command line. We can just stay in the same command line that we were in, and we'll do ntds util. And I can press the enter key, and it's going to create an interactive prompt. So we're really in this ntds util context. Now if I type help, it provides me with all the different contexts, the initial context I should say, for ntds util. Now depending upon what context you're in, if you're in the IFM context, you're going to have different commands than if you are in like the roles context or the files context or anything like that. So we're going to be creating IFM, right? So let's type IFM. And now it's going to tell me, hey, the Active Directory instance is not set. Let me tell you what this is telling you, okay? We have to tell it which Active Directory instance, which Active Directory set we want to create an IFM for. So here's what we do, okay? We type activate instance ntds and press the enter key. Now, NTDS is going to basically connect NTDS util to your domain controller that you're currently on. So basically what we're doing is we're telling this utility to look at the domain controller Active Directory network domain services. So what we just told NTDS util to do is we're telling it, hey, I have Active Directory domain services on my machine. I want you to look at the domain services on my machine and connect to that instance, all right? So it is possible, by the way, to have other instances, quote unquote, of Active Directory, but that's a whole different class for a whole different day. All right, so right now we are connected to NTDS, okay? So that's the first thing we have to do. Activate instance NTDS. Now let's run IFM. And you notice that provides me with an IFM prompt, right? So now I'm going to type help. And now it's going to ask me, or it's going to provide me with the different items that I can actually run inside of the IFM context. And by the way, I can do the same thing by typing a question mark too. It just gives me the exact same thing. All right, so here is what we can do. We can create a full IFM, and that will create IFM media for a full Active Directory domain controller or a lightweight directory services instance. And this little percentile S, this is where we put in the folder name, okay? We can create an RODC, read-only domain controller media set as well. That's something we'll probably think about doing later on in the course. We can create a sysvol full. Okay, this will actually include that sysvol folder we looked at way back. Remember, your sysvol is where a lot of your guts are for your domain controller. This is a good idea, by the way. This is the one we're probably going to go with. We're going to create the sysvol full. The only difference between the full and RODC is that a full IFM media set is for a regular domain controller, and an RODC as well for a read-only domain controller. We haven't talked, I know, about read-only domain controllers hardly at all at this point. Don't worry about it. We will be talking about them later on in this course, okay? So what we want to do is we're going to create a full IFM media set so that we can create, or in the instance of a domain controller completely blowing up, recreate a domain controller using literally a DVD or CD-ROM, if you will. But chances are CD-ROM is going to handle that much data. So we'll go ahead and we will we'll create sysvol full. And we're going to place the sysvol full on the E drive. Actually, you know what? Let's put it on the F drive. Okay, that's where our regular backup is going to live at. And we're going to put it in a folder called IFM. Why? Because that's easy to remember. So here's what IFM is going to do. Okay, and this little utility is going to do. It's going to create a subset of your domain controller, all of the guts, similar to system state, but not quite. But it's going to be similar to system state. It's going to be a subset of your domain controller. It's going to back it up to this IFM media set. Now I'm going to show you what the IFM media is going to look like after we finish doing this. Then what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to take the IFM folder, burn it to a DVD, and in case a domain controller blows up and we need to recreate it, or if we want to create a new domain controller and add one to our network, we can take this IFM media set, use it during the DC promo wizard that I've shown you a couple of times, and this IFM media set will actually pre-populate your Active Directory with all of the stuff that's currently in your Active Directory database. So that way your new Active Directory domain controller, or your recreated domain controller, if that is the case, doesn't have to replicate and set and pull all that information from another domain controller. So it's going to save you some bandwidth if you use this. And don't worry, we're just creating it right now. I'm going to show you how to use this IFM stuff coming up pretty soon in another video. All right, so I'm going to hit the enter key here. And what's it telling me? Well, it's telling me that I can't find the path because it doesn't exist. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll tell it to start. We'll go to the computer. Hey, wait a minute. Where is our F drive that we created? Well, let me go show you what's happening here. All right, I'm going to go back into Server Manager here real quick. And I want to show you what happened to the hard disk that we had set up and formatted. You remember that secondary hard disk? All right, I'm going to go here under Disk Management. I want to show you exactly what happens, because when you set up a scheduled backup to an attached disk like we did, it reformatted the disk, right? So here's our disk that we set up and we had it reformat, but notice what's missing. Oh yeah, look, there's no drive letter, is there? Why? Because Windows Server Backup has basically taken over this disk. This is another reason why you might want to look at utilizing a third-party software, and why Windows Server Backup is really good for simple, if this is all you got, it's good enough type of backups. But if you want a more full-featured backup set, you're going to really have to look elsewhere, because Windows Server has taken over this disk for its own purposes, and that is it. Okay, we're really not going to be able to do much else with this disk unless we add drive letter, and then if we add a drive letter to this, Windows Server Backup is going to get angry with us because it said this disk is mine. Okay, that's fine. We'll go ahead and we'll let you have this disk for now anyway. So let's go ahead and let's minimize Server Manager again here. Let's close my computer. Let's go back. Instead of running it to the F drive, what we're going to do is we're going to create the sysvol on the E drive. This IFM data set on the E drive, and that'll be okay because we still have room. And we'll put it in the IFM. Now, even though the IFM folder does not exist, don't worry too much about that, because it will actually create that folder for you. So it's no big deal. It even gives you kind of a cute little defragmentation status. So it's going to defragment our Active Directory database for us, and I'll talk to you more about doing that defragmentation process and the advantages to it during the monitoring and maintenance section of this series. All right, so it didn't take very long at all for it to create this IFM media. Let's go ahead and let's go back to the computer, and let's take a look in the E drive in the IFM folder. Let's open it up, and here's what we got. We have our Active Directory stuff. Now, ntds.dit, if you remember way back at the beginning of our course here, ntds.dit is the actual database file, right? Here is the registry files that come along with our domain controller, and here is the sysvol. Now, if we didn't specify sysvol in that particular command to create this install from media file set, then we wouldn't actually get this sysvol stuff in here. But we did want it just in case, because it does contain copies of our group policies. Oh yeah, that's kind of important, right? Once again, the advantage to creating an IFM media set to create a domain controller with is it's going to save you bandwidth, so you can create a domain controller without having to replicate data back and forth between domain controllers. Remember, you want your domain controllers to be able to know what's happening all over your network. In order to do that, they have to replicate every so often. But we don't want them to copy the entire Active Directory database over your bandwidth. because chances are you have other users actually doing work over your bandwidth. So this is going to help save that, and especially if you are creating a new domain controller and you're sending it to a different office, maybe that other office doesn't have a very high amount of bandwidth in its network connection between you and it. Well, IFM Media still allows you to create that domain controller in that other office. What you can do is you can install Server 2008 to a machine, do not run DC promo, create IFM Media like I just showed you here, burn this IFM Media folder to a disk, and then take the disk, take the domain controller, ship them both to the other office, and then let somebody on the other side, preferably someone who knows what they're doing, run DC promo, use the IFM disk to create that new domain controller over in the other office. And we can do this also with read-only domain controllers too. But again, we're going to talk about read-only domain controllers in a different video. We'll start talking about it in this series though, so don't worry too much about that. All right, so we have finished, we have completed our tasks. We have created our backups, right? We've created an initial backup. We've also scheduled a backup. We have created our system state backup, and we have created also our IFM backup too. So we have 3 different kinds of media that we can use to restore or recreate, if need be, a domain controller in case DC2 blows up. Now, here's the next question. Did we need to do all 3 of these? Well, no. We're kind of overshooting here a little bit, but each one of these has a very specific use. Obviously, the full backup is a full backup of your entire server, specifically an entire volume. System state is only the guts of your Active Directory domain controller, and then IFM we can use to quickly and easily repopulate and recreate a domain controller without having to have your new domain controller or recreate a domain controller, if that is the case, having to talk back and forth to a different domain controller. Okay, so each one of these 3 kinds of media that we've created have different purposes. At the end of the day, they're all pretty much geared towards the same thing, but the easiest way to think about it is this, okay? A full backup is a lot of stuff. It's everything on the volume, okay? System state backup is only the guts of your domain controller. And then the IFM, this is the smallest amount of stuff that you can back up and still get and recreate a functioning domain controller with. Okay? That's the easiest way to remember. A full backup is the most, system state is the middle, and IFM is the absolute minimum that you can use to create or recreate a DC. Okay, I think we've beat this one. So let's go ahead and let's go back to the slides. Let's do some wrap up and then let's move on. All right, so for your viewing pleasure, here is our vocabulary words. Windows Server Backup. This is the built-in GUI for doing simple backups of entire volumes. Remember, only for entire volumes, right? WB admin is a command line for doing standard backups, but most of the time we'll probably use it to create system state backups, which remember is the smaller amount of data. WB admin, remember, you can also do a full backup with, okay? NTDSUtil, this is an Active Directory specific interactive command line tool. It does a lot of different stuff, as we saw from the different contexts that we saw. I could probably seriously do like an 8-hour course in NTDSUtil just by itself, okay? But in terms of backing up a domain controller, we use NTDSUtil to create IFM media. Basically, only creating the bare minimum amount of stuff that we would need to create or recreate a domain controller. Of course, it's not going to have everything, all the data, on that folder, but it will have your Active Directory stuff that you absolutely need. Let's talk about IFM media. Remember, that stands for Install From Media, and that can just be used to create and recreate a domain controller quickly. The system state backup is created by WB admin. It contains only the guts of your Active Directory that are absolutely necessary for faster restoration of a domain controller. So if you have a domain controller that blows up and you don't want to restore all of the data, but you gotta have a quick, easy restoration path, this might be a little faster than doing a full recovery of the server, and that way we would have with Windows Server Backup. So Windows Server Backup takes the longest. System state backups will give you more stuff. It gives you more power in terms of what you can restore, but not all the data. IFM will obviously take the least amount of time, but it restores the least amount of stuff. Okay, all it restores is really your Active Directory database, and you have to use it when you're creating a brand new domain controller or recreating a domain controller that blew up. So after viewing this video, you should be able to schedule a nightly backup of an entire volume to an attached disk using Windows Server Backup. Also, you should be able to do a one-time backup too, but I just kind of threw that in there because, hey, we were there, right? You should be able to create a system state backup of a domain controller using wbadmin, and we saw that it's really a pretty easy command to know and to use. You should be able to create IFM media using NTDSutil. And last but not least, hopefully by this time you should be able to describe the differences between the three main backup and maintenance tools in Server 2008. Okay, well, that wraps this one up. So in the next video, we're actually going to use IFM media to create a brand new domain controller for our New York office here in Global Mantics, because the current way that we have our domain controller set up isn't quite right, okay? And I'm going to talk to you about that in the next video.